Okay. Hello, Garielle Lutz. I am so honored to have you here. And I am welcoming you to the Bending Genres reading and interview.
Thank you.
Night. Thank you so much for saying yes. I just, I'm a huge fan. I'm a fan for life. So,
Thanks.
And sorry about the octopus in the background for everybody. If anybody doesn't like those pedophods or whatever they're called. What are they called? Pedalophods? I didn't mean to call it a pedophile. It's a pedophile. They have an interesting name, but yeah, whatever. Okay. So is it okay if I just do a little intro of your background as a writer? Garielle Lutz writes both poetry and fiction, and you do hybrids of every kind, I would say. Did you say that? Yeah.
Yeah.
She is the author of the collection of short fiction, Stories in the Worst Way, published by Knopf in '96, and republished by Third Bed in 2002 and Calamari Press in 2009. Her second collection of short stories, I Looked Alive, was published by the now defunct Four Walls, Eight Windows in 2003. That sounds so cool. I've never heard of that one. And republished by Black Square Editions, Brooklyn Rail in 2010. Partial List of People to Bleach, one of my favorite titles of all time. A chapbook of both new and rare early stories was published under your pseudonym, Lee Stone. I love that. How did you come up with Lee Stone? That's great.
Lee is my middle name, and Stone was my mother's maiden name.
Oh, got you. Okay. Sounds like it could be a porn name, don't you think? And that was published in Gordon Lish's The Quarterly and released by Future Tense Books in 2007. And then Divorcer, a collection of 7 stories, was released by Calamari Press also in 2011. Her collected works, The Complete Gary Lutz, was published in 2019 by Tyrant Books. And her newest short story collection, Worsted, is published with Short Flight Long Drive Books. Should I go into your recipients? You're a recipient of a, I'm sorry, of a literature grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And in '99, she was awarded a grant from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts Grants to Artists Award. She is now retired from academic teaching and was a longtime assistant professor of English at the University of Pittsburgh at Greensburg. Welcome.
Thank you, Meg.
And I wanted to say, my brother lives in Pittsburgh, and he lives in a little offset of Pittsburgh. They bought a house, but I can't remember the goddamn town. But it's like out there in a little, and you're kind of off too, right outside Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Do you like it out there?
Yeah, I love Pittsburgh.
I know, it's a cool city.
It is.
I remember when I first went out there, it was horrible because I was stuck in the car with my entire family, and all of a sudden I had diarrhea, like I felt it coming, and I was in a real bad place.
Oh.
And we were going around the whole city, you know, like they're like, oh, look at this. I'm like, can we just get to their house, please? That sucked. Anyway, I did want to read the blurb by Otessa. Is it Moshfegh or Moshfegh?
Yeah.
Moshfegh. I love her.
Me too.
And I love you. And I love how much she loves you. So I'm just going to read the blurb by Otessa. Garielle Lutz is a master of the art of American English. Her stories are disruptive, heartbreaking, peculiar, sharp, and staggeringly beautiful. They are crystalline and dangerous, diamonds that can gouge your eyes out. Her work has inspired a movement in literature that is religious in its precision and weirdness. I like that. She has solved the literary quandary of illustrating the vulnerabilities of human nature and relational dissonance with true feeling and no sentimentality. Hell no, none. I could read her stories all day and all night. Each story in these collections is a song that ruins me in its oblique precision and resolve. She is a national treasure. Yes, you are a national treasure. I'm just adding that to hers. I'm so excited. I can't believe there was a time when I didn't know you. I didn't know of your work. It's sad to me. It's really, really sad. Because I think that a lot of people start out writing as independents and don't fit into the little blocks that they set up, and have their own way of doing things. And people are always telling them, oh, that's too much, or that's too this, or that's too whatever. And you offer the best and give the rest of us a chance to be able to just be in our writing and do what it is we want to do with it. And that's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So would you read some of Worsted? Would you read a couple of passages for us?
Sure.
Thank
Sure.
you.
What I'll read is part of the title story, Worsted, which is the longest story I've ever written.
I know that is a long one. That's beauty.
Thanks. And it's narrated by a man, and it takes place like in the 1990s or some time period like that, when people were charged for long distance calls, because there's a reference to bills.
Yeah.
So something came over me a couple of nights ago. It was that funny feeling again. The conviction that comes from having had too much dumb luck in the very year set aside for backing out of life. I walked downstairs, though this time not taking my time, and got into my car. I drove to a home improvement store and bought a nice piece of lumber, a big shrink-wrapped slab of plywood. I brought it back to the building and hefted it through the lobby and up the stairs. There's an elevator, but I never use it, and into my apartment, and then set it down atop some plastic crates stacked too high. Okay, there. I've got a table now. Okay, that's as much as I must have been telling myself. I sat down on the floor beneath the table. The minute the evening rates went into effect, he
Garielle, the sound. The sound went out for a second there.
Hello?
There you are. You're back. You're back. I think
that's-
just one sentence back, and then you went out.
Oh,
So I'll just go like this. If the sound goes out, I'll just go.
okay. Okay, there. I've got a table now. Okay, that's as much as I must have been telling myself. I sat down on the floor beneath the table. The minute the evening rates went into effect, he called. He said I had a hamburger story to tell and a grocery store story. I had a hamburger story too, but he told me to make it quick because he wanted to go to bed. My hamburger story required some background because it was actually two stories, one about that day and one about the day before, both involving the same burger asylum and the same counter damsel who both times was on break and sitting at a booth, but who came into the picture by her own doing on both occasions. The man wanted me to describe her, but I was in no mood to go into bodily specifics or deification. This displeased him. His girlfriend had gone away for 10 days to think some more, he said. He said she'd been calling him overcontained, emotionally finite, untrustable, lumpily aloof, too picky about the things he'd taken to keeping under his pillow. He wanted to know what I was wearing, and I lied. He must have known I was lying because he said, "That's why you'll always be living alone." And then he hung up. It had been on his bill anyway. He always spoke in an over-enunciatory, speech-teacherly way that could be hard to take when he was in the wrong. I turned the ringer off. I got up off the floor and arranged a few things on top of my new table. A batchlet of hospital patient bracelets I couldn't stop collecting, and snippets of necklaces that had long since run their course. At some point, I walked to the kitchen and started boiling water in the big pot I'd bought a month or so back. This was the first time I'd tried to use it. The boiling water was going to be for egg noodles, evidently. I couldn't go through with it. The next night, it started on my bill, and after a few minutes, switched over to his. He insisted we limit things to hamburger stories from that point forward. His new stories involved novel ways to make himself look uneasy when going to places like that, as if he were forced by circumstances to eat there now. I told him I already missed talking about other things. He told me to shut up. I defied him and resorted to endearments. He hung up. He was never big on getting together. He kept saying we lived too far apart. But we had met up one summer at a suitable lake that had a boardwalk. Few lakes around here do. And at some point, we were sharing a large coneful of French fries I'd been the one to pay for. I believe I was the one holding the cone. In those days, he still smoked. He had a cigarette in one hand. He very deliberately, but very casually, jabbed the burning end of it into my palm. He said, I can't eat and smoke at the same time. Don't keep expecting things of me. He always had it pretty good. He'd worked in human resources for years. All he had to do was teach the new hires the easy way they could tell the difference between the professionals, the paraprofessionals, and the people on staff without once ever needing to ask. There was a simple trick to it, he'd assure them. Then he'd have them looking at drawings of all three walks of life. And then from the drawings, he went on to portraits in oil, altarpieces, carvings, tapestries, watercolors, acrylics, double exposure photographs, overhead projector transparencies, slides, video cassettes, 8mm film reels of cherishly garish coloration, charcoal sketches, gouaches, otherwise unclassifiable works on paper, one-offs and one-of-a-kind. He insisted there was a difference. He'd tell every new hire she was a quick study, butter her up, and then send her out into the corridor to fall flat on her face.
Mhm. The part where he like takes a cigarette right to your palm is a pretty intense part. An ass. I mean, I know these are all fictional, but I've heard of people that do that all the time, and it's just like frightening to me.
It
But
is.
thank you. That was so great, so good. I love that whole collection so much.
Thanks.
Um, so you say in your lecture, now we're going to move a little bit over to The Sentence is a Lonely Place. Love that.
Thanks.
Did you read? Somebody wrote on Twitter that if you read Garielle's Sentence is a Lonely Place and then read their interview with you, then you had a master's. You were set. You had an MFA.
Oh,
So I've done both, but I haven't gotten anything in the mail, but I'm sure it's coming. Because that is freaking awesome. Can we swear? Fucking awesome. Okay. You say in your lecture, The Sentence is a Lonely Place, that you came to language only late and only peculiarly. That's a hard one to say. Peculiarly. And then I have a quote of yours. I have a couple quotes. I keep quoting. Writing for me is nothing more than an endeavor to disexpress or unexpress or de-express what the world has conditioned me to express. Can you say something about that line? Because that's really what you do. I mean, I feel it.
well, I think as you go through school, because I went through a writing program, a master's degree program in writing, and they pretty much lay down the law in terms of what you can do. And I found constrained by that. I found myself constrained by that, and I wasn't able to communicate whatever I was trying to communicate. But I think I made the mistake of going to a master's degree program in writing when I was too young. I went right after I got my undergraduate degree. I was like 22 years, and
Right.
I think it was a huge mistake in retrospect. I never should have done that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I meant by that quotation was simply that um, instead of speaking the language, make the language speak you. Uh, Try to bring out of yourself whatever it is that distinguishes you from every other human being on the planet, something that you alone have to say, instead of saying what you think other people want to hear.
Right, right. God, I hope someday you'll teach again. If you ever do, just let me know. Okay.
Okay.
Um, so I have a few quotes here again. Sorry, but I can't help it. I've got my books are just underlined from end to end. I mean, I might as well just put a big thing around the whole thing and just fuck it. I mean, it's brilliant. It's so good. But these are a few. Well, there's one about and my mother, but the other one was the house was fastened nicely enough to the neighborhood, which is so beautiful. Um, and this second quote that I have, no, I have three. Sorry. And my mother, there was a biographical side to her life. No doubt, though nobody had ever thought to take notes, you were left to assume that certain qualities, tics, and anything plausibly endurable about her would later be attributed to something hardly her better. I laughed really hard at that one. And then there's the light came off her not in a fixed, steady beam, but in sloppy gushes she had no real control over. It spattered all over the place. And I know that light. I've seen that light. It's like in hospitals and like, just gross places where they have those fluorescent hellish things. So you wrote that home shared itself with phone books and magazines. When and how did books make their way into your hands? Your interior, your being. And do you remember the first books you loved?
Well, as a kid, I wasn't verbal very much at all. I was
Yeah.
very quiet, and I didn't do very well at school, and I wasn't much of a reader. In fact, I think if I were in school now, in elementary school, I would be diagnosed with some kind of learning disability.
Mhm.
So when I first gravitated toward books, it was more so that a book offered some kind of shelter. I mean, I didn't even have to read it. I could just, hold it up and be behind it somehow. That old expression, nose stuck in a book or something like that. And when I did start reading, I mean, I would occasionally withdraw books from the school library, and I guess they were typical kids' books. But I remember getting some kind of interest in the Tom Swift series, which was some kind of series of books. There was also the Hardy Boys series,
Oh
but I
yeah,
read,
yeah. Right.
yeah, the Tom Swift one, I guess, is less well known, but it was
Yeah.
about some boy who was an inventor or a scientist. And I read those, I remember reading those books, but not enjoying them or getting anything out of them whatsoever. And, I recall um, reading Mad Magazine, and there were there were two competing magazines that tried to get the same audience. There was one called Cracked and one called Sick. I
Uh,
think I think Cracked might still be in existence. I don't know about Sick anymore,
yeah, I don't know.
but I read those, and I read comic books, though we called them funny books. And the one character in comics that I really liked was Nancy, who was for the Daily Strip. It was drawn by Ernie Bushmiller, who apparently had been told very early in his career that he essentially had no talent. But I gravitated toward his strip, and I still love it a lot. And then
Is
I
she
would
the one with
start,
the bow in her hair and she's got
yeah,
like the black little things coming up on her head? Oh, I loved her. Yeah.
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So I would read that, and I started getting interested in music, and I would read music magazine, rock magazines, things like that. It wasn't until I was really, I guess, in ninth grade or something like that, that I had a friend named Keith who was a heavy duty reader, and he recommended a lot of books to me. First of all, he recommended books about Dadaism and Surrealism,
Wow.
and at that age, I was kind of in a quiet way rebellious, so I was interested in reading about the anti-art of the the Dadaist movement, and um, I liked the dreamy quality of surrealism as well. But then he got interested in the Beat Generation, so I started reading the things that he was reading, like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg,
Right.
and I especially, now this was when I was in high school, I got obsessed with William Burroughs, even though I had a hard time reading his work. But he had a partner or a friend named Byron Geisen, I think the guy's name was, and he had this technique that he called the cut up. So you take a printout, like a page that's printed out, and you cut it into 4 quadrants and you rearrange them, and then you type up what the rearranged words are. So
Okay.
I got fascinated with that. And then like the post-beat writers like Lawrence Ferlinghetti and then Richard Brautigan. So I got really intensely involved in reading that stuff.
Mhm.
And I felt that I wanted to grow up and move to San Francisco and just join that movement. But um, then,
How old were you at this time? Were you like a teenager or?
yeah, at this time I would have been like a junior or senior in high school.
Okay.
Yeah, so I envision eventually going to San Francisco. I've never actually even been there. But then one day I was in a 5 and 10 store, a 5 and dime. They don't even exist anymore, except for things.
Woolworths or one of those,
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
Woolworths? Yeah.
yeah. This wasn't actually Woolworths though. It was called Greens,
Mhm.
and they had a table with coverless paperbacks. These were paperbacks that had initially been sold, or they tried to sell them in drugstores, things like that. Uh, and then I forget what the strategy is, but stores were then able to sell them without the covers. The covers, I guess, had to be returned to the publisher to get some kind of refund. And then the coverless paperbacks.
I had no idea. That's so cool.
Oh yeah, well this is the way I bought most of my books when I was a kid. Not simply at this 5 and dime, but there was even a store called the 19-cent bookstore that sold primarily coverless paperbacks. So that was one of the thing. But in this 5 and dime, I came across this book, a coverless paperback, a rack-sized coverless paperback called Enormous Changes at the Last Minute by Grace Paley. And
Yes, love
I,
that.
yeah, now at the time, the name Paley meant only one thing to me. There was some kind of executive at CBS, Bill Paley. So I thought, this woman must be his wife or something like that. So I bought the book, and it wasn't anything about television, but it was the first time in my life that I was struck by writing that is entirely sentence based, because her paragraphs would be short, and every sentence was almost a world unto itself. And I thought, I didn't realize that people could write this way. I had
Yeah,
no idea. I mean, it was very daunting. I was very intimidated by this because I thought, how does she do this? How does she come up with this?
I
Because
know,
uh,
right?
yeah,
So
you had to, like, each sentence was a thing unto itself. You had to read really slowly, and even if the stories were only a few pages long, it's almost like there was an entire lifetime packed into that. So I saw that and I read it and didn't do very well with it because it was just over my head at that time in my life. Um, so I wasn't reading more books along those lines. I got into Philip Roth. He was very popular, especially popular at the time. So I'd be reading, I read about maybe the first 8 or 9 of his books, including Portnoy's Complaint. I used to carry that around high school, thinking that somebody would call me on it because, it was considered to be a dirty book, that sort of thing. And I remember one girl saying to me, "Isn't that a dirty book?" And I said, "It has to be." I don't know what I meant, but that's what I said. And I was struck by some of his, not that book, but uh, there was a short story of his that appeared in a literary journal that came out in paperback form. I forget what it was called, something like New American Writing or something like that. And there was a story by Philip Roth in there that I think has never been collected, but it was about a circumstance by which Albert Einstein became a guest on a quiz show, a radio quiz show. And that was another story that was really sentence oriented. And I was
oh,
I was both fascinated by it and intimidated by it. And I thought, that's what I want to try to do
yeah.
occasionally or eventually in my life. And then right before I went off to college, I started getting intensely interested in Truman Capote and also Andy Warhol.
Oh
So I
God.
was reading Truman Capote stuff, and some of his stuff is sort of like it verges on prose poetry. So I was interested in that, and I was attracted to the way in which Warhol was able to succeed in the world by essentially being inarticulate, even though we now know that he was extremely
He was
articulate. But
brilliant.
yeah, but he was doing this act of
Did you,
attempting to
did you
appear.
see him on the Dick Cavett show when he was with Edie? And he was
Yes,
whispering in her ear, his little answers and not saying anything. Yeah, that was
yeah,
great.
yeah. So I was fascinated with him for a long time, but I didn't really have a sense of direction about what I wanted to do. So when you asked me, what books did I covet, uh, I remember one of the first times I ever went to New York City on the bus.
Yeah.
I bought some Truman Capote paperbacks because they weren't really available in bookstores in the city where I lived, even though I could get them out of the library, but I wanted my own copies. So I guess those were the first books I was coveting, Capote stuff, and also some Warhol, some books about Warhol.
Really nice. I have a little story with Paley where I went to this reading when I was really young, and I just sat down. I got there early, and all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by like Rita Dove and all these writers are around me. And I kind of recognize some of them from some of the book covers, but I'm not sure. And there's still a seat open next to me. And then this woman comes in with like 6 bags and she throws them down and she goes, "Hi, how you doing?" I said, "I'm doing great. How you doing?" She was amazing. I loved her. She was like a total Chicago lady for me. And then they start going on about Grace Paley, and they introduce her, and then she goes, "Can you watch my bags?" And she gets up and it's Grace.
Wow.
I was like, oh my God. She's amazing. She's the real thing. Another one. So great. Yeah. And I love her work. And you're right, those sentences. Yeah. So you saw them way back. I mean, you saw the difference between the writing where somebody's writing moving towards something, a plot, and then the difference between somebody who's really looking at the beauty of each sentence as it goes, like how it stands alone, how it moves. Yeah, that's amazing. That's so cool. And that was still when you were like 16, 17?
Yeah, I was in high school, and I didn't encounter her first book, The Little Disturbances of Man, until maybe like a decade after that. Because I never even thought about seeing whether a library would have her books. But I had that one, Little Disturbances of Man, and I read that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, so good. So I'm going to go into your, well, I was going to ask you about when did you discover that the blank piece of paper was going to be your canvas? Like, when were you going to do that? Did you have like a notebook? Well, you carried around a little notebook in your pocket for a while, but did you start that when you were in high school?
Actually, I started doing things like that when I was in elementary school. I would write little books on memo pad paper, like the 3x5 memo pad paper, and then I would use 3x5 index cards for covers, staple them. And
that's the book I snort. That's that story I snort laughed through, which was where you were putting them in the slots, the slots at that job.
That's right. Certain Riddances is the
The
story.
woman with the different colored hosiery. Oh man.
But I started doing that when I was a kid, and my mother had an old typewriter because she had gone to some kind of secretarial school. And I became obsessed with the typewriter. I just loved to type anything. So I would be typing a lot. I read her, I mean, I didn't read from start to finish, but I would read through the books that she still had from secretarial school. And I thought, wow, that must be a great job to be a secretary because you're just typing all the time. And so I was writing a lot as a kid, but it was all nonsense. And in fact, at one point, and I use this detail in a story, when I was in elementary school, I somehow got it into my head that when you're writing a sentence, all the words have to be connected with hyphens. So I was turning assignments in with the hyphens, and the teacher said, get rid of those. And in fact, I remember also in elementary school, I was in a drugstore where I saw a rack of paperbacks, and one was called How to Improve Your Vocabulary. So I bought that, and I took it home, and I read the first lesson, and there were 2 words in there that really fascinated me. One was eldritch, and the other one was gelid. Eldritch really means so like scary or weird, that sort of thing, and gelid simply means very cold. So the next day in class, we had a paragraph writing exercise, and I wrote a paragraph in which I could fit those 2 particular words. And when the papers were turned back, she said, "Don't make up words." So,
oh, I love it.
So that was like my first experience of somebody telling me, "Don't do anything different. Stick with the 1-syllable words," that sort of thing. So, and then in high school, I started writing poetry because I was influenced by Richard Brautigan's poetry. Mm-hmm. But the poetry I was writing was just very solipsistic and surrealistic. I don't think it made any sense even to me, but that's what I was doing. So that was my introduction, I guess, to dealing with the blank page or confronting the blank page.
Do you keep those? Do you keep or do you burn? Are you a burner or a keeper?
I didn't. I'm definitely a keeper, but the things that I wrote when I was a kid, they're all gone. Nothing nothing remains whatsoever. I don't know if I threw them out or if my mother, when she was going through my stuff, maybe she threw stuff out.
Yeah.
I do remember when I was in high school, I bought a 2-drawer filing cabinet that could lock. And my parents were suspicious of that. Why do you want this locked filing
Yeah.
cabinet? But all I was doing was putting in there
I lost you. Can you talk again?
yeah, I don't know what
You're
to touch.
back. You're back.
Yeah, I don't know what to touch when that happens because I didn't touch anything.
You just push different buttons and see. I know. I don't know anything either, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
But you're back.
Okay. So I had this locked filing cabinet, and one of the things I was doing at that point in my life was keeping a dream diary. And my mother did find that. I guess I didn't put it away right one time, and she was shocked. Why would you want to keep a record of your dreams? And I can understand that. I come from a very conservative Pennsylvania Dutch background,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, so there wasn't really any talk ever about emotions, the inner life, that sort of thing. And
Right.
I was sort of fascinated by the inner life. Why am I having these dreams? That sort of thing. So I wanted to keep a record of them, but that's gone. I don't know if I threw that out or if, I think I might have felt guilty about having such a diary. I might have thrown that out myself, but all my high school stuff is gone,
Oh,
except for I think one research paper that I wrote about Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. I still think I have that somewhere.
oh yeah. Frank Zappa, another amazing. We have every Frank Zappa album here at our
Oh,
house.
well, when I was starting in ninth grade, I started making a lot of tape recordings, and Zappa was the early Zappa were only in it for the money, Lumpy Gravy, Uncle Meat. That was the period of Zappa that I was really uh, crazy about. And a friend of mine, the same friend Keith, does this do anything?
Gotcha.
Oh, that must be the thing that I have to.
Whatever
But
you
I
push there, yes. And then everything goes on. I can hear you. Yes. The sound
oh
background. Okay. Thanks.
okay.
So you had all the Frank Zappa, the early stuff.
Yeah, just the early stuff. I sort of lost interest in him post Hot Rats. Um, when he went into like Waka Jawaka. Well, I think Burnt Weenie Sandwich was the last Mothers of Invention album I really loved. No, Weasel's Rip My Flesh was the last one. But then I just sort of drifted away from him, especially when his music became more, there was a lot more guitar soloing. And although I always admired Frank Zappa, I was never crazy about his solos, his long solos. And a lot of people criticized me for having that opinion because I just never really got into that. I was more of Garcia fan, and a lot of people hate Garcia, but I just found that Zappa's soloing seemed cerebral, and Garcia's solos sounded very emotional, and I was drawn to the emotionality of Garcia.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, he was very cerebral. Um, I don't know so much about him as my partner knows a hell of a lot more. He followed him all over Europe, and
Wow.
yeah, he's from Italy, so he spent all this time on his motorcycle cruising around from concert to concert. So that's
Wow.
why we have him. So every Sunday morning, I'll hear Frank, you know, in the other room. Um, and then he said you like the Smiths, though. The Smiths,
Oh yeah, but I didn't discover them until about 10 years after they broke up, which
okay,
is usually the case with me with anything I come to love. I discover it belatedly. But yeah, as soon as I heard them, because I previously, I would say that my favorite band of all time was the Velvet Underground. But
yeah,
once I started listening to the Smiths, they sort of displaced the Velvet Underground for me. And I listen to their music virtually every day. I can't live without it. You know.
What about Lou Reed? What do you think?
Well, I was a big Lou Reed fan for a
Yeah,
very long time.
yeah,
His later work sort of alienated me. It didn't seem as if it was really putting much effort into it anymore. But strangely, his first solo album, simply called Lou Reed, is generally not considered to be a major work. I do consider it a major work,
sure.
and I was I was ecstatic when I learned a few days ago that they found the acoustic demos that he recorded before his
Yes.
oh, well, that time I pressed the volume control button. So maybe it just,
It's
anyway,
gonna, it's gonna keep messing with you.
yeah. So they found all these demos and I guess they're going to release them in some way. And these were demos, acoustic demos, not only for his first solo album, but some songs from Transformer.
Uh-oh. Yes. Now you just came back. Are you there? Yes.
See, I don't know what I'm doing because I'm just pressing random keys or so I don't know. Um, so
I don't want it to end.
yeah, it's fun.
I know. This
I
is
think it was,
great.
I think the second year that I was out here, I saw signs, come meet Lou Reed in the Oakland section of Pittsburgh. So I thought it really meant come and meet him. So I was the first person at the record store and I was the first person in line. And Lou Reed came in with some security guys and he sat down at the table. I went up to him and I started saying, I can't believe I'm meeting you. You've meant so much to me. Your music has changed my life. And he cut me off and said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to sign something? So I didn't even have anything with me, but there was some on the table, there were some pieces of paper. So I gave it to him, he signed it. So then I didn't want to leave the record store. I had a cheap camera with me and I was taking pictures. And after a few minutes, one of his security guys told me, you got to leave the store. So that was my one encounter with Lou Reed, though I'd gone to a few of his concerts.
Do you remember the Patti Smith story when she met Burroughs? And when he realized that Patti was a girl, he was like, what do you want? You know, kind of like that. Like it was like that was the end of it. At first, he thought that she was a pretty boy. So he bought her a sandwich and those little sandwich automat things. And then when she went to sit down with him and stuff, and then he realized, no, this is a girl. He was like, you know, bye.
Wow. Well, she was so androgynous looking at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, that's the thing. Like we meet these people that we like have this around, you know, and then they turn out to be kind of assholes.
Yeah.
Or just, I don't know, maybe he was having a shitty day. But, you know, to do that to a kid is kind of sucky, I think.
Well, at the time, I was probably like 28 years old, so I wasn't a kid anymore.
Well, kind of, you know.
Yeah, I guess.
You know,
I was a big Patti Smith fan too. Horses was like a life changer for me, that first album.
I know, right? Love. I know. I saw her when she wrote her, I don't know, she's written quite a few books, like 3 books in a row, but his second book, I think it was Devotion.
I forget the second one. The first one was Just Kids, and then
yeah, Just Kids, and then she did one, and then she did another one. I think she gave out a copy of Devotion to everybody in the audience, which was cool. Played the guitar, and it was in a small venue. I'm in Santa Fe, so it was at the Lensic, which is, it probably seats about 250 people, and it was like, it was so great. It's so amazing. I love when they go back to small venues, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people like that. You know, because the large venues are so alienating and crazy and whatever, you know.
Yeah, even Morrissey has a DVD called Live at Hollywood High. He just did a performance in a high school auditorium, and that was terrific. It was very intimate compared to his, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I saw Aretha Franklin in a small Chicago theater. That was cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I love her too. There's so many. Oh my God. So do you still listen to the Smiths, or do you have like certain favorites? I remember you said that when you buy an album, you'll just repeat the one over and over and over. I always did the same thing too. Like if I got Led Zeppelin, Kashmir is like one of my favorites. I would just put on the headphones and I would listen to that over and over until I knew every single word to it before I would even think about going on to the next. And it sounds like you did the same thing.
Oh, I still do it.
That's
But
so
I
cool.
when I had a car that had a cassette deck in it, I would often dub a 90-minute cassette with just one song. I was obsessed with a Pavement song called "Here," which sort of sounds like the Velvet Underground. To me, it almost is a Velvet Underground song that Pavement wrote. And for months, that was all I listened to in my when I was in my car, just that song "Here" over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm still like that. I will just want to hear the same thing again and again and again. I watch the same movies over and over
I
as
know we
well.
talked about Wendy and Lucy. Wendy and
Yeah.
Lucy. I got all sad about the dog, but I did understand what you were saying about the dog, that she had to give the dog up. And it was a real talk about the biggest sacrifice she could do. I mean, her best friend, right? So I understand that. She's such a great Michelle Williams is who we're talking about. She's so brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about that film is that there's very little dialogue. So everything is communicated by gesture, facial expressions, things like that.
I love that cop, how nice
Yeah.
he is to her. I
Yeah.
wanted to just hug him. I loved him. Yeah. Yeah. There's few people in it and very little dialogue. And yet she emotes so much through it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I could see why you'd want to watch that one. Did you like Harold and Maude, or is that too crazy for you?
The only time I saw that, I think I was an undergraduate in college, and I really couldn't get into it. And when you brought that up in your email, I was thinking that again, I have no idea what I'm talking about because I saw the movie when I was a kid, and I had a bad reaction to it. And I
Mm,
was thinking about it, and just the other day after your email, and there was a term that came up in film reviewing maybe like a decade or so ago called the manic pixie dream girl, who would be this young woman, the manic pixie dream girl, who would be this young woman, often with pastel colored hair or fluorescent hair, that sort of thing, who finds a young man who's depressed or sad about something.
and she's
Or,
got to take care of him, that kind of
yeah.
thing.
And
Yes.
so I was thinking about how, but again, I saw the movie like 50 years ago, that in a way, Maud was maybe a progenitor of the manic pixie dream girl because
Yeah.
I guess the concentration camp she was in, and here's this boy who just wants to keep killing. He has all these suicidal attempts, and
Right.
she teaching him about the beauty of life, that sort
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. I could see that. I just found the characters so hilarious. Like the mother, Pickle. Her name really is something Pickles. I can't remember it. That's like her last name. And just her doing her little thing when she's Harold's hanging behind her, and she's
Oh,
asking him questions for the dating service. And oh no, and then she starts answering herself, oh no, I would never. And she's like, going into it. So it moves from her talking to Harold to her filling it out for herself, kind of thing.
oh,
But yeah, I've watched that so many times, but I get what you're saying about that. She could have been the first. I actually read some of her books afterwards, Ruth Gordon, and they were great books, really,
oh,
really interesting. I mean, her life was so interesting, and she was an amazing. Yeah, it was a long time ago, so I couldn't really say why, but I remember that I really loved them while I was reading them. But yeah, I know how you get on something, and it used to be that we didn't have so many books, so we only had a few books that we read over and over and over again. Like that was um, I lived in Montreal for like 3 years. My brother teaches out there. And so I would go to the French library, and there was only a small section for the English books. So that none of them were alive. I just read dead folk, and I just went one after another, and then I would see who they learned from and who their teacher was, and just kept going back and back and back in time. And so when I got back here, and decided that I wanted to, spend more time writing, it was different. It was different because people are like, you mean you haven't read so and so, and you haven't read, that kind of thing. You do that with books where there's certain books that we love that, I mean, they change over time with how old we are and whatever age or how we're writing or whatever, but are there certain ones that have stuck with you?
Yeah, one of them is the J.D. Salinger novella that most people don't like. It's called Seymour: An Introduction,
Oh yeah.
and it's more like an extended essay than a novella. But I've read that so many times. I keep coming back to that, and I've read The Great Gatsby many times. I love the prose, the music of the prose, and that. And just within the past 15 years or so, a book that I keep rereading is a book by a writer called Christine Schutt. It's a story collection called A Day, a Night, Another Day, Summer. And it's one of my
Guess
favorite
who
books.
told me to get
Yeah.
this? Dun, dun, dun. You did.
Oh,
So I ordered it right away after we had emailed. I was like, I got right on, or I saw it in an interview or something, and I got right on it. I was like, I got to get it. Got to get it.
I love that. Yeah.
It's so good. Yeah, but I'm still reading you. I can't. I don't want to get past it at this point. It's too wonderful.
Thanks.
You are working on something else, though, aren't you? You're working on.
Uh, I am, but it's a lot different from anything I've done before because, well, actually, beginning with Worsted. Worsted isn't so much a new book as reworkings of drafts that I abandoned in the 1990s when I was writing my first book.
Right.
What happened was when I had moved from one apartment house to another 20 and a half years ago, I boxed up a lot of printouts from my first word processor, dot matrix type stuff.
Yeah.
And I sealed the boxes and I brought them here to my new apartment, shoved them into a walk-in closet, and never thought about them until 2 summers ago when I was going through that closet and I was thinking about throwing stuff out. And I unsealed these boxes and I was kind of startled by how much was in those boxes, how many typewritten pages, how many dot matrix printouts with what was then called draft quality. So it was lighter. So it was even kind of hard to read some of these. And initially, I thought I should just dispose of all the stuff. I didn't think it would be anything in there that I would want to work with. But
Right.
I discovered two things. The first thing was that I had actually been keeping a journal of sorts for quite some time in the from the second half of the 1970s through the first half of the 1980s.
Okay.
But it wasn't a journal in a conventional sense of a book in which I was writing something, but they were just loose pages that I had typed on and never thought that they really added up to anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I discovered that there was this extensive journal. I would estimate that the stuff probably is like 1.5 million words. That's how extensive this is. And
Oh
then
God,
a
you're
friend
like Thomas Wolfe when
well,
they found his big chest that they
yeah,
opened up.
well, it wasn't quite that much. But what also happened is that about a year ago, the friend that I mentioned earlier, my friend Keith from when I was a child and a teenager, he got back in touch with me. We sort of fell out of touch for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he had kept all my letters and he said he would send them to me so I could look at them. And it was a huge box that was sent to me. There were 210 letters, but when I say 210, one letter itself was 30 single space type pages long.
Oh my God.
So, so I realized that when I was in graduate school and not doing writing that got me anywhere with my professors, they didn't care for what I was doing. At the same time, I was writing about my life in the town where I was living in graduate school, and I was just writing weird stuff that I observed during the day. So
Right.
some of this went into the things I was typing, but a lot of it went into these letters. So my first project was to essentially come up with a kind of memoir in letters and journal entries of my life because I never really write stuff that could be considered autobiographical or that I think is autobiographical. So
Right.
that's the big project that I've been working on and off. I call it backwardness because it's about going backward, and I was a very backward person, and still am in most ways. So that was the thing. But then also what I found were all these drafts of stories that I was working on while doing my first book, but I abandoned these stories thinking that I can't really do, I don't know what to do with them. I thought they were dead ends. So when I found these, I thought, well, in some cases I found printouts of early versions of the stories and Stories in the Worst Way. And I had crossed out so many sentences that I could no longer figure out why I had deleted those sentences. So there were two stories in the new book in Worsted that are actually pretty much just compilations of sentences cut from two stories in Stories in the Worst Way. The story on Natively, which is about a kid, what starts when he's in college and then he goes through a few marriages. That's one of the ones. And then there's a story called The Water Table. And that essentially is just sentences from a story in my first book. But then for these other printouts that I found, I thought, why don't I just finish these stories? And in most cases, I didn't even really have to add much. I would just be assembling things that were in all these drafts, because I would always print out at the end of the day everything I did that day, everything I produced that day. And so I would say 75 to 80% of the material in Worsted is stuff that I wrote in the 1990s. So it's not really a new book in the sense, it's a new book in the sense that it just came out, but it's what I was doing in the mid to late 1990s.
It doesn't feel different. It doesn't feel that different to me from your collected works. Like,
Well, the one difference that I discern, but maybe nobody else would see it, is that the stories, like the one that I read tonight, it's
yeah,
in a much plainer style, a much more straightforward style. Whereas, especially when I got into my second book, I Looked Alive, the writing was becoming more dense, more compacted, and kind of very elliptical and to a degree solipsistic. Whereas I thought in this new book, it's much more direct, in my opinion, and rather plain. Some of the sentences are just straightforward sentences. There's no real working of the acoustics or the shapes of the words the way I typically did in the
yeah, but I
past.
feel like they still stand by themselves, that they, okay, I'm just going to read straight up from something here. I remember having to kill a fate-scorning amount of time on the toilet afterward, doing my damnedest to try getting everything out, but probably just blushing down there.
Well, that sentence was in one of those old printouts, but I did work it further a little bit.
Yeah. Oh my God. And Dorothy, was Dorothy in your old, or did she?
Not the name, but the character was. Yeah.
I love her. I love her. I
Thanks.
love her dot, 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 with the different things she has to say.
Oh, yeah.
So in this book now, you're using some of the letters. Are you using the letters that you had from your friend that your friend sent back to you?
Yeah. I would say, I think in that batch of letters, it was probably something like, I don't know, maybe 150,000 words. I typed up 40,000 words from those letters because a lot of the stuff in there, I mean, I just wanted to keep stuff that I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
So this was not a journal of a lot of introspection. It's a lot of anecdotal material, weirdnesses that I saw on the street, conversations that I would overhear at fast food places or lunch counters, weird encounters on the street or in laundromats. So there's a lot of that. But in these letters to my friend, there was also a lot of personal stuff about the classes I was taking and professors, things like that. Almost all of that I cut. In fact, I think I kept something about one particular course where the professor was really, really difficult and peculiar and kind of sadistic. I kept some of that stuff, but for the most part, no. It's just things that happen on the street.
Right, right. So when you're writing, a lot of times I can see I'm off my little script here, but it's way more interesting to talk to you. Uh, do you write a lot of it when you're at home? Do you bring back the notes that you've like put together, or do you write when you're in? I think I heard from one interview that you like it quiet when you write. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was younger, my memory was so much better. For example, I found in those journals, well, I think these might have actually come from letters to Keith, extremely detailed recountings of layovers at the Columbus, Ohio bus terminal when I was taking a bus from Allentown to Athens, Ohio. And as I read through these recountings, I remember those actual incidents, but I don't know how I remembered so much. So a friend of mine and I are actually we're putting together a chapbook about bus experiences. So
Oh,
I'm
they're
going
the
to,
best. Oh my God, I can't wait.
I put those two long remembrances of experiences in the Columbus bus terminal. They're going into the chapbook. Yeah. So,
Nice.
and the thing is, my letters to my friend Keith, and there was another friend who also sent me a box full of all the letters that I wrote to him. That wasn't as, there weren't as many, but I'm blending those letters with that typewritten diary or journal that I kept myself.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's what this project really is.
That
Yeah.
sounds great.
I
Sounds
think
amazing.
I think it's like
You must
180.
be extremely prolific. I mean,
I'm not though. It's
how
quite the
much
opposite.
how much do you produce in a day? I thought it was just like some sentences, but like in terms of when you say, like you would have, I don't know if, yeah, you were talking about a different writer, but I think you were also talking about yourself, and I might be wrong because I always get it wrong, but I mean, that you would have spaces where you would have to put the right word in and you would wait. Who was that had to wait till the exact word found its way in that
Well,
spot?
I do know that in an unauthorized biography of J.D. Salinger by Ian Hamilton,
Yeah,
he somehow found out that what Salinger would do. This was after he stopped publishing when he was living essentially as a recluse. Apparently, he was still writing, and apparently, some of those books are about to come out within the next few years. His son, one of his sons, or I don't know how many sons he has, but a son is editing them. And I remember reading a letter somewhere to the editor by an elderly woman saying, "Please put those out during my lifetime." And I sort of
yeah,
feel the same. But essentially, what Ian Hamilton was saying was that during this period when after Salinger stopped publishing, he was still writing, but he would have like a slot that had to be filled in a sentence, and he would spend hours coming up with lists of maybe like 100 words that could fill that slot until he arrived at the one that was inevitable
right.
for him. And I do something similar. I mean, I don't come up with 100 words, but um, when you mentioned that I was prolific when I was younger, when I was in graduate school, and also when I first moved out here, and I would come home from a day at work, and I would just type up. I would start typing about my day. I was prolific in that sense. And when I discovered these boxes, all the stuff in the boxes, I realized how prolific I've been. But these days, now I'm the opposite of prolific. I mean, most days I don't produce anything whatsoever, or I might write down a word that occurs to me in a
Yeah.
little notebook, but then I lose track of the notebooks, and I have lots of index cards all over the place too. But there's no organization whatsoever, so I'm not at all. That's why my complete stories book it's 499 pages. I couldn't even get to 500 pages.
499 is a good number. God damn it. I like that.
Well, there are a lot of words on the page, though. It could have been laid out differently with larger type, wider margins, that sort of thing.
One of those large type books. Then you could have gotten up maybe to 1,000. Who knows? But
Yeah.
who cares? 500's a lot as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, that's amazing. Um, let's see. I'm going to see. What about the Lish years? Were those before you went to Lish? While you were teaching in the summers, you would take a bus out there, right?
Actually, I drove for those, and then
Oh, you drove for those.
yeah,
Okay.
that was the longest drive I'd ever undertaken. It was to Bloomington, Indiana. He
Yeah.
somehow, he somehow was able to. He got permission to teach in a classroom in, I guess it was the English Literature Building. Yeah, the way
Okay.
that came about was that during a time, during a long time when I thought I'm never going to be able to write, I don't know how to write, I would come across books that turned out to be edited by him. And so I learned who he was.
Yeah.
And he was, at the time, he was editing a literary magazine called The Quarterly, which was initially published by vintage paperbacks, which is the paperback imprint of Random House.
Mhm.
So I would come across these remaindered copies of the Quarterly for like $1.99, and I would look at them and I would think, I would buy them and I would bring them home, and the writing was so odd, it was so weird, and it appealed to me. So I started sending him little poems, just like a sentence or two long, and he accepted some. And that's when I thought, wow, somehow I made a connection. I mean, not a connection in terms of a career connection, but I mean an emotional
Oh, yeah.
and connection with this editor, Gordon Lish. So I started encountering books that I learned that some of the books that I bought remaindered copies of had actually been edited by him. I was just gravitating to these books that were quite short. They were very slim short story collections, which were for the most part sentence based. So
Yeah.
then I found out, so I started sending him fiction. I sent a few stories to him under a pseudonym, Lee Stone, the Lee Stone pseudonym.
Mm.
And he accepted some of those. And then I tried to write a few longer stories, which ended up in Stories in the Worst Way. One is called Waking Hours and one's called Slops. And after he accepted those stories, he sent me a brochure, or not a brochure, but just a one-page application form for a class that he was teaching. So
Okay.
that's how I got started with that. Yeah.
Were you ever afraid of him, or? I
Oh
mean,
yeah, the first year I was terrified. He
I just look at him and he scares me when I see him on, I mean, because he's such a big man and he's like got this really
oh
powerful way about him.
yeah. Well, he has a teaching persona that is kind of intimidating. And I was extremely intimidated and scared to death pretty much by the first week, because these classes, it was only 1 week, but they would last 7 or 8 hours nonstop. There were no breaks for eating, no bathroom breaks, nothing like that. And if somebody did get up and go to the bathroom, go to the restroom, he would talk about that person after the person left and said, that person has no stamina. How is that person going to be a writer if the person cannot sit
If he
still?
can't hold his pee.
Yeah, exactly. And the second day, and these classes were simply him talking. Students didn't talk at all.
Yeah.
It was an improvised lecture for 7 or 8 hours. And the second day, something went wrong with the air conditioning system in the building. And we were freezing in the classroom. We were shaking and shivering. But he wasn't affected by that at all. He just kept talking. He did not even acknowledge that it was
Was he
frigid.
just wearing his jumpsuit and like
Yeah,
nothing else, the usual?
yeah, the jumpsuit, yeah. And the thing is, after that second day, I found a Goodwill store in Bloomington, Indiana, and I bought a winter coat. I brought it to class the next day. The next day, the air conditioning was fixed. Everything was fine. Well, yeah, those classes were very scary, because on the second and third day, he would point at somebody and say, "Read a sentence that you wrote."
Right.
Then he would take the sentence apart, but in a way that illustrated what can be achieved within the boundary of a single sentence. See, that first year was scary. The subsequent years, they were still scary, but I didn't feel as if my life was on the line, by
Yeah.
attending the classes. So he's been the most influential person in my life,
Yeah.
and it was his discipline, his exactitude, his passion for sentences that really appealed to me and changed my life, frankly. And I had been reading Susan Sontag, her book Against Interpretation, and
Mhm.
some of the things that she said in the first two essays in that book, the essay called Against Interpretation and the one called On Style, sort of overlap with what Lish would be teaching.
Mm.
Because one of the things that really struck me that Sontag says um, in her essay on style is that it turned out to be something almost identical to what Donald Barthelme said within a year. I forget who said it first, but Sontag and Barthelme said that we have to stop thinking about a work of art as a commentary on the world. We have to think of the work of art as a thing in the world, an object in the world,
Yeah.
not a commentary on it. And that overlaps with what Lish is all about, because Lish's emphasis on the sentence, the sentential event, the sentence as an object that has certain properties that can be enumerated and discussed, and meaning is not all that important. And in fact, in her essay against interpretation, Sontag says that interpretation is the revenge of the intellect on the world. And the way I took that to mean in terms of art, that interpretation is the revenge of the intellect upon art itself. That what critics often do is reduce the novel or the story or the poem to some banal, well, I shouldn't say banal, but some interpretation that doesn't take into account the mystery or the ineffability of what's being said. And
Right.
Lish was emphasizing that information is the death of fiction. You don't want exposition in a piece of writing, in a short story, a novel, or a poem. You want to seduce the reader. You want the reader not to be able to look away from what is before the reader, even though the reader may have no idea what's in front of her. That it's just this artifact, this creation.
I just read a story of Lish's where it's they're downstairs in the laundromat. He's sitting next to this man is sitting next to this woman, and it's all dialogue all the way through. But it's, it's different because at that time, they had the quotations. He didn't use those at all. I mean, it was just little indents, movement all the way through.
And that's another thing that he emphasized, movements that he called consecution and the swerve and recursion. It was his notion, well, it's not his notion, his philosophy, that when you're writing a sentence, each sentence has to challenge or overtake or overturn or overwhelm the preceding sentence, or has to refute the previous sentence. As a matter of fact, there's something, there's a really basic example of that in this Christine Schutt book, where there's the very first story in the book is about a mother, one of whose sons is in a rehab facility.
Right.
And in the conversation between the mother and the son says, "I made a lot of friends." And then the mother says to the kid, "So what do you do with your friends?" And then the boy says, "They're not all friends." So a complete undoing of the
what he said previously.
Yeah. So that's a basic example of this overturning or overthrowing of the previous sentence. So that's what he called, but that was the recursiveness or the swerve that he talks about. But he also talked about consecution. And that's when each successive word in a sentence has to arise because the previous word has discharged something of itself. So you carry this forward, and this sort of overlaps with something Sontag said herself, because she said that a work of art arises through secretion. Like one word has to secrete something of itself into the next one. And I thought, so she's really thinking along the same lines of what Lish talks about when he's talking about consecution. And I mean, I have to admit, freely admit, that Lish's lectures are pitched at such a high degree of abstraction that a lot of it was over my head. So I was simply trying to take away from it what I could for my own work. Mm-hmm. And I especially took away this sense of find your next word by looking back at what you've already written. Look back instead of looking ahead, because this was something he was always emphasizing. Don't look ahead. Don't even think ahead. Don't have any blueprint. Don't have any outline whatsoever. But carry forward with something that's already there.
So you're looking at what's behind you, the sentence that, so you have said, here's a few things that you have said, and that also Lish, I have a Lish quote, do I? No, the only thing I said about him was that, Lish said to go backwards from sentence to sentence, and then you will have something. What are your thoughts on this? Like, I was going to ask you about that because you wrote in The Sentence is a Lonely Place, and these are sentences that I took separately, like the words intermingle and blend and smear and recompose themselves. I love that. The lonely space of the sentence feels colonized. The sentence feels filled in from end to end. There are no vacant segments along its length, no pockets of unperforming or underperforming verbal matter. The words of the sentence have in fact formed a united community. So somehow at some point, he was saying that they come together. While you go backwards, they're finding a way to each other in a way. Is that?
Well, that's my understanding of what he was saying. Maybe I completely misinterpreted,
I love
but
it.
it's a sense that the words in a sentence have to be united or connected not only by the laws of grammar and the syntax and punctuation, there has to be something else holding them together.
Okay.
And I've noticed that in a lot of the writers that he has taught, or writers that he's edited without having taught, and also a lot of writers, a lot of artists of the sentence who preceded Lish, that the same things are happening, that there's something holding the sentence together beyond syntax and grammar, that the words are speaking to each other, that you'll see something echoed in the later word that was present in an earlier word. That's that I think of as at the heart of Lishian's philosophy of composition. But again, I know I'm oversimplifying it to a regrettable degree, but that's what I took away
Well, I
from.
think that all we can do is take away what we can take away from it. But it sounds pretty great to me, what you're saying here. And I want to ask you, like him as a writer, I just ordered 2 of his books after, emailing you and reading about you. And um, do you think he does it as a writer? I mean, do you
Yeah, I think.
think that he makes it happen?
Oh, definitely. I would think that his philosophy of composition is an outgrowth of his own approach to writing.
Okay.
One, one of the things that some people say about Lish when they read his work for the first time, they say things like, "Why is he writing that way? Why isn't he writing some other way?" Well, when I was in classes with him, occasionally he would just do he would orally produce a Thomas Pynchon type sentence. He would produce a J.D. Salinger. I mean, he would just invent a sentence in the voice of Pynchon or Salinger, of other major writers. So
Yeah.
he could do that. I mean, he once published a story that a lot of people thought was a Salinger story. He published it in Esquire when he was an editor there. It's the very last story in his first book. No, I think his second last. I forget the sequencing,
What's
but
the title of that book?
I
Because
think
I'm wondering if I ordered it. Was it
oh,
the,
that's called What I Know So Far. That was his first story collection. So when that story came out in Esquire, a lot of people thought, "Wow, that's a Salinger story." So he can write in many different voices. The voice that he writes in is the voice he wants to be writing in. That's his voice. And I mean, some people say he's sort of like Beckett, Samuel Beckett, that because he produces the sound on the page that is unlike anybody else's. So no, I admire his writing very much. I could never do anything like that. And he's following his own principles of composition.
yeah, 'cause sometimes teachers don't, sometimes teachers are really great teachers, and he's also a great editor, but maybe they're unable to do it themselves. And that's what I was curious about. It's like, did you buy his books
Oh, absolutely.
for the class? Before the class, did you buy those? Did you get them?
Uh, I I bought the books that were available before I took the class, but I didn't buy them thinking that I'll need these for the class or anything like that. But no, I wanted to get my hands on everything that he had written. And by
Right,
that point, this was in the maybe like 1993. He didn't
right.
have a whole lot of books out at that point. He had the first story collection, and I guess the novel Dear Mr. Capote, and the
Oh, yeah,
novel
yeah.
Peru, and also Mourner at the Door. I think those were the only books that were out by that time. So I bought them, and the story that you were mentioning earlier about the laundromat, was that the one that ends with the reference to a rat that a woman thinks that her daughter's, or maybe that's a different story.
No, it's the
Oh,
same one. So
yeah,
she's, it's amazing how it moves that way. And then he's afraid to take his stuff out of the dryer because he's like, oh man, really, did she have to take me there? Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's so well done, and it just has such a great movement and pace and just, yeah, every sentence. It's truly a beauty. And I'm glad that's the first one I've read of Lish. I hate to say it.
oh,
I've ordered two of his books, the Mourner, and then the one about Truman Capote. because I love Truman Capote too. So I just, yeah. So I thought, okay, those are two good ones maybe to start with. And I can't afford the collected book. It's like $160.
Oh, the first collected book, because there were.
They have one, that's up on that. I couldn't only find them through Amazon because now there's no bookstores to go to that I know of here, at least. And yeah, it's $160.
Wow. He actually edited some Capote. When
Did
Capote
he?
was, yeah, when Capote was claiming that he was writing this novel called Answered Prayers, some of those stories, some of the stories that Capote wrote when he claimed he was writing this novel, Answered Prayers, which he never finished, they were published in Esquire, and Lish published at least one of them.
Wow.
Yeah. So the book came out. The Capote book came out. It's called Answered Prayers, but it wasn't a novel. It was just 3 stories about rich people in New York.
What about the one Other Rooms, Other Places, Other Rooms?
Oh, that was Capote's first novel. Yeah, I love that. Well, I loved it when I was a teenager. I haven't read it in decades. I don't know what I would think about it now, but I was.
Still think of his ants, those ants.
Oh, yeah. Well,
It's amazing.
I was obsessed with Capote. Yeah.
Yes. And then what did you think when he went to kind of a nonfiction book, when he wrote that book? That was kind of wild. I remember exactly where I was when I read it. I was on a train going somewhere, and I read the whole damn thing on the train, and I was just obsessed with it.
Did you mean it in cold blood?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what he called a nonfiction novel. But then later on in his life, when he was kind of unfocused and
you mean drinking like a maniac?
Yeah. He was hired by Interview magazine to do some pieces that wound up in a book called Music for Chameleons. And I guess that was the last real thing of his that came out. Because Warhol was obsessed with Capote. Warhol used to essentially station himself outside of Capote's apartment in Manhattan because he wanted to meet him. Yeah.
I did that with one. I stalked one writer. Did you ever read Marguerite Gordon, Miss Mackintosh, My Darling?
Yeah, I know the book, but I haven't read it.
But she was already dead. It was so sad. That's the story of my life. I ended up with, a little late. Always late, always late. But she lived in Washington Park, and she had lived in this building forever. And it's 2 volumes, and I got first editions from this really cool bookstore, and it was one of those bookstores where you go in and you talk to the woman who runs the place for like hours. Do you know what I mean? And they'll save books for you. Like I was into Swedenborg for a while, and like whoever else. I had all these weird different things, and she would save all those books for me and stuff. And I miss those days, damn it. But yeah, I wrote her a letter, and I used to stand outside her window and yell, Marguerite. It would have scared the shit out of her if she was alive. She'd be like, who's that crazy girl out there? Get her out of here.
I now know the book that you're referring to because I saw somebody writing about it on Twitter a few weeks ago.
Really?
Yeah, but I haven't read it. Yeah.
God.
The only writer I ever wrote to was John Updike. I had seen him on television on some talk show, maybe like 35 years ago. And he was saying, we have this word misogyny for hatred of women. Why don't we have a word for hatred of men? And I knew what that word was because I read dictionaries at that point in my life. So I wrote him a letter saying the word is misandry, but I never got a response from him. That was the only time I ever wrote to a.
I love that you were letting him know there is a word.
And I was kind of surprised that he didn't know it because his vocabulary was enormous.
Yeah, but yours is quite enormous, I have to tell you. I mean, just like the words, plus the words that, like, I'm going to read these now, the ones that I put down. And this is nothing. I mean, for anyone out there who's listening to us, please get all of her books. They're brilliant. And the one thing I know is that you had I used to collect old dictionaries also and find really interesting, weird ass words. And I love making verbs from words, but you were finding words that were verbs, but they were verbs in a different century that you were bringing back, right? I mean, that's what's so incredible about these words. Like worsted. Tell me again about worsted, because
Oh,
that,
well, this came up simply by reading. I mean, I don't read dictionaries very often anymore, but for some reason, I picked up one of these unabridged dictionaries that I have in my apartment, and it was on the page where worst was. And I saw that it can be used as a verb. I didn't know that. And essentially, it simply means to defeat or to best somebody.
right,
So I thought, there's my title, not only for the story, but for the book. I mean, there was a dictionary, it's still available. It was a 1934 Merriam-Webster Second International,
yeah,
which is considered to be the masterpiece of American lexicography. And when the successor to that came out in 1961, the Third New International, the New Yorker magazine didn't even want to have anything to do with the third edition because it was a kind of permissive dictionary. It was what they called a descriptive rather than proscriptive, or rather prescriptive. It was a descriptive rather than prescriptive dictionary. So in other words, in 1961, when that unabridged dictionary came out, the editor subscribed to the philosophy that a dictionary should not lay down the law about what words mean. A dictionary should record the ways in which words are actually used.
okay.
Whereas the 1934 edition was prescriptive. It told you how to use these words correctly. So yeah, a downside of the 1961, but I end up in that dictionary for one reason or another almost every day. But you have to realize that it is a permissive dictionary. So it will record usages that are not considered standard. One thing that really bothers me just recently is that increasingly young people, are using the term ground to mean the floor. So they say, I dropped my book on the ground, and
Oh,
they're actually in a house or a building. And Merriam-Webster.com, to this point, well, the last time I looked was maybe a few months ago. They haven't yet recorded that usage, but eventually that's going to wind up in
okay.
there because so many people are saying that. In fact, I was in a Target store just last week, and one employee was talking to another and referred to something on the ground, and it was on the floor. I mean, to me, a distinction like that is worth preserving.
And then cement and concrete,
Oh, yeah, some people are. Roxane Gay has written about her
right? About
prior.
that really bugs the shit out of her. Yeah, and I
Yeah,
I get it, you know.
yeah,
And I realized that I had to go back and look at certain things I'd written to make sure. I was like, oh shit. You know, I wanted to see, had I done that, you know, had I made that change, because you're right, language changes as people start to use it more and more in the wrong way. You know, it becomes another word or another usage, you know, and it's scary.
yeah. One of the things, unfortunately, Merriam-Webster has now given its approval to this, but a few years ago, people started using the participle concerning, like this is concerning to us, and what they mean is worrisome, that sort of thing, or this should be of concern. And now just about everybody's using it. I see it virtually everywhere.
Sure. Yeah.
And the distinction between persuade and convince has broken down. There used to be a very clear-cut distinction between those two words. There's a lot of things like that. So Merriam-Webster's 1961 dictionary would record definitions of words the way people actually use them, whereas in 1934 was a prescriptive dictionary, told you how to write. And what I especially love about the 1934, because you were mentioning old words, at the foot of every page are, in smaller type, words that were becoming obsolete at the time the dictionary was going to press, when it was being written, rather.
Yeah.
So I found a lot of interesting words down there, words whose meaning is almost instantly understandable, but they've dropped out of the language. So I thought I was trying to refresh the language by using some of those words.
Did you like that film where they were doing the Oxford Dictionary, and it was called I read it first when it came out, and it's called The Professor and the Madman.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a movie on that. I wasn't even aware of that.
I think it's on Netflix. You might be able to get it. Do you get Netflix? Do you
I
get,
get the I get the DVD by mail version of it because I like to watch
okay.
a lot of foreign movies, so I don't do the streaming.
And
But
it's also, it was a book first. And
yeah, I have that. I have that book. Yeah,
oh, you
yeah,
have the book. All right.
yeah.
So the film was not, it's not bad.
Oh,
John Penn is in that. Can't remember anyone else, but it was good. It was really,
oh,
really well done, I have to say,
wow,
for what it
wow.
was.
Yeah,
We have to talk more. I've so enjoyed this.
me too.
Would you read something else for us
Yeah,
from Worsted?
yeah. I just want to get a drink real quick.
Thank you so much. I had so many more questions for you, but I don't care. Oh, and then I just wanted to ask you about Eugene Martin's Fire book.
I
Did you
haven't read that yet. I read his first book called Waste,
did you
and
like it?
yeah, I loved it. And I understand that he has two new books coming out in the next few years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. Waste. Great.
yeah. I've always heard people raving about firework, but I haven't gotten into it yet.
Well, Lish went on and on. I
Oh,
saw,
I know.
yeah,
Yeah,
he loves that. He went out about the fire book. He kept it. So I was like, I got to order this. So I ordered it right away.
yeah.
I got to stop ordering books. I can't even catch up right now. It's like out of control. Do you feel that way
Oh,
sometimes?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I have far too many books that I haven't read yet.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I used to have a house. I lived in a little back road on a, well, I mean, there were like holes in the ceiling and shit. It was like a tiny little place. And every book I could say in that house I had read. And
Wow.
it used to be in the time when you would, get a catalog and then I would pick out another book or two and get those instead of now where it's coming at you from all sources. Because of the internet, we're getting like, oh my God, this one read this book and this one read that book. It used to just be that I would pick them out by what I thought was interesting or whatever, and then just go from there.
Do you mean the Hamilton Books catalog? It was like
I don't,
remainder books. Because I
it
used to get.
might have been, it might have been, yeah. I can't remember what it was called, but it was just a little thing that looked like one of those community college,
Yeah, exactly. That's. I mean, there was one called Hamilton Books, and that's I
yeah,
ordered from them. Yeah.
yeah. And I'd read every damn book in that place.
Wow.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope we get to do this again. I really enjoyed this. I'm sorry I have to cut it short because I don't know about these recordings or whatever, but if will you read something else for us?
Yeah. Um, this is from the very last story in Worsted, which is called Written at Work, and
Okay.
it's the narrator is a woman in her mid 30s or something like that. The only person still talking to me at work confessed that life wasn't fodder enough for her anymore. She looked good in blue though, with that typically sticky frosting of makeup. She had somehow expected the office to be more of an erotic environment than it was turning out to be. There were accruals of something possibly cruel in her eyes. She'd grown up in a family unusually short-handed when it came time to scatter any affection around. Her father had had a godsend hernia to nurse. Her mother sent all her prayers overseas, and there was a sister she never got in good with. Her roommates in college had left her alone, and her first love had been a woman in the last storm surges of her early 30s. This woman, and Alona,
Storm surges. Is that it?
yeah,
Yes.
this woman and Alona, I later found out, could be scaldingly self contained 1 minute, then the next minute have trouble getting herself back up to life size. Alona had no use for what her body wanted her to do. Alona would have been satisfied with any end in sight. Everything was Alona this, Alona that for a while, and I was soon making it a point not to keep up, though I wasn't tiring of the details themselves. The last my new friend had heard, Alona had tripped into a marriage with a man whose past was said to never once show through on him. Again, I never minded listening to my friend, if I may keep getting away with calling her that, go on and on about herself. I've always preferred people with little to spare in their nature. She was soon sharing photos of her furniture, of her parents' beflowered gravestead, of her sister. Her sister was now racked in a chance marriage, and in the picture, the sister looked impassionately nonchalant behind a register at a fabric store, a prune purple bruise on the one forearm showing. My friend and I started observing each other's birthdays. We cheered each other on through the hours until we could wring a day free from its drivel of minutes and see each other off.
Amen.
Her commute home involved two tricky bus transfers. I typically now walked. In merriments I now had no right to feel just yet. Some nights she showed me some nights she called me near tears, but never ready to cross any threshold. I was always struck by the breadth of everything she never suspected about me. She would sometimes put the phone down without hanging up, and I could sometimes hear her taking her time on the toilet. Those days I was quick to take anything as an overture. Some she brought me things she'd baked, cookies with abstruse names like shucker winkles, lady skins, doodle husks, happy peels, red caps, things that were often as not hard on my teeth. Other days she would drive for cover in her folders, her portfolios, then ignore me altogether. The winter that year was beyond tropical. The dress code had to be relaxed and then relaxed again and again until the in-house designer was calling for hemlines that went all the way up to the waist. You could gape through practically, you could gape through practically anyone to everything and everybody even farther beyond. When spring came, there wasn't all that much left that hadn't already been spritzed to the breaking point. Then the drought set in. By summer, we were, all of us, coarsened, raw-hearted, assassinative. Fall returned us all to tact and timidity. Through it all through the year, I sometimes lost sight of my friend for weeks at a time. She alone had been given dispensation to do some of her work from home. Then her calls stopped. I got used to going unscrutinized again through week after week. People talked, People walked loathingly past me on their way to other people. Then she gave her 2 weeks' notice. I remembered her having once mentioned a background in something or other that entitled her to be a leading light in off hours and on weekends. It turned out to be a good thing that people were starting to get me mixed up with somebody else. One morning alone, I was taken for a Lisa, a Cindy, and Andrea. It was a good it was a good thing because it got me thinking that I might possibly have the makings in me of some other person completely. One hand may wash the other, and both hands may wash the face, but the shoe is always on the other foot.
Thank you. That was
Thank you.
hilarious. Once again, I love it. I am so happy that we got to spend this time together. Thank you
Thank you.
so much.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Can we do it again? Like
Sure,
sometime? Just
sure.
hang out? I just love talking to you and you're brilliant. You have so much. You're just fierce individuality is what I have to say about you. And hilarious, by the way.
Thank you.
Well, I hate to say goodbye, but I think we have to. Will you have a great night?
You
Thank
too.
you. I'm gonna have a Big Mac, god damn it, one of these days. Okay, hopefully
Okay.
we'll talk soon. Take
Okay.
care.
You
Bye,
too.
Garielle.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, Meg.
Now here's me trying to figure out how to end it because I
Oh,